Welcome to Stand By Please.
With me, Antonia Collins from the Bamboo Manager Project.
And me, Jacqui George from Sharjah Performing Arts Academy.
In this podcast, we talk all things stage management. Join us and our guests as we try to answer the question, what is your stage manager really thinking?
Morning.
Good morning.
Here we are then.
Week 15, and this is episode 6. Well, 7 if you include the trailer.
What a brilliant reaction to the last one, though. I've had so many positive comments from people.
Isn't that fantastic? And it's so interesting how many stage managers and non-stage managers could relate to those perfectionist traits.
So this is going to be our last one for a little bit because we're going to have a little pause.
Yes, we're going to take a little short summer break, but we'll definitely be back as we're only about, I think, a quarter of the way through our list of podcasts and topics we want to talk about. Who have we got joining us today, Antonia?
So we've got one of my oldest friends today, Barbara Eifler. She was my first ever proper boss. So when I left Welsh College, I got sent to this Clwyd, and Barbara was the stage manager. She said to me on day one, forget everything you've learnt at drama school and you're going to start again. So I guess that a lot of what I do is based upon what she told me. She's one of those people who always gives really good advice.
Fabulous. I know exactly what you mean when you say if Barbara says to do it, you do it. On the few times I've met her, she's certainly one of those people that she has this fantastic knack of getting things done and getting other people to get things done, which I love.
One of the reasons why I thought she would be a great guest for us, and one of the things we're going to talk about today, is from her time at the Stage Management Association, where clearly she moved out of stage management to run a membership organisation. She's always been very vocal about what amazing skills stage managers have, but they're not necessarily very good at articulating them. And you know, I think before we got to COVID, lots of stage managers got to kind of like their middle, late 30s and were like, do you know what? I fancy doing something different. Now, of course, we're in a crisis, so we're in a totally different thing. But I thought it would be good to have Barbara on to talk about some of those, what she thinks are those great stage management skills and how best to describe them when you're applying for what we might call a muggle job.
Hi Barbara, how are you? Good to see you and thanks for joining us today.
Hello Jacqui, and long time no see. Lovely to see you too.
Antonia and I have been having a chat recently about how sometimes stage managers want to diversify a bit, it's fair to say, and certainly as stage managers progress in their career and get to a certain point in their lives, they start looking for different opportunities and challenges. And of course, when we had that conversation, you sprang to mind instantly because in your previous role at the SMA and the move that you made in your careers, you are so well versed in that skill set of stage managers and how they can be used elsewhere. So could you tell us a bit about your background and how you moved into the SMA and what you see as good transferable skills for other roles?
Having worked as a stage manager for 10 years and then having run the Stage Management Association, which is a professional body for stage managers for over 10 years, I then went and worked as membership director for Making Music, which I am now the CEO of. So Making Music is a membership organisation, and it's the UK Association for Leisure Time Music Groups. We have about 3,700 music groups in memberships throughout the UK, and that includes about 200,000 participants in those groups. And we provide services and artistic opportunities, and we also provide a voice. So we do campaigns and lobbying and advocacy. So my situation was that I then decided I wanted to move on into management anyway, because I found myself as stage manager sorting out problems that the administrator or general manager of a theatre company had created, like that tour schedule that closed in Aberdeen on a Saturday and opened in Brighton on a Monday. So I thought, right, I'm sure I could do that better. So actually my first step was that I did an evening part-time course at what was then the Roehampton Institute, it's now Roehampton University, in arts management. So I did that whilst I was still working as a stage manager. Like you say, there is a challenge in how you then persuade other people that your skills as a stage manager are valuable to them. So I think the course helped because people felt, do you know what I mean, she does know about arts management. And my first job actually before the SMA was I became the administrator of the Chester Mystery Plays, which is a thing that happens every 5 years in Chester. And I'd been production manager for the previous one 5 years before, which was quite brave of them, seeing that I had no experience in running a festival of, 30 plays over 3 weeks with thousands of audiences. But in the middle of that, I got pregnant. And actually, I didn't see it through and handed over to someone else who I believe did a great job. But yeah, so then I had the course, I had a little bit of experience, and I had a small baby, which is not a recipe for going back to working into theatre, really. I think my husband could see that I needed something else to focus my attention. He noticed that the Stage Management Association, of which I'd always been a member, was looking for someone to take over from the legendary Joy Cruikshank. I applied, and there were about 3 or 4 of us being interviewed. And I have to say that here, the course and the little bit of experience that I had before I went off on maternity leave were really, really useful, because I did have a sense of, what it is to run an organisation, what the issues might be, etc. And, I'm very happy, obviously, that the board of the SMA thought that my skill set was very good for this job. I mean, it really, really helps if you've been a stage manager in order to have that job or to have some experience of that sector. Doing some sort of training that gives people confidence, I think, is helpful. And then, obviously, it is about how you sell the skills. And I think you're right that stage managers often don't understand the amazing skill set that they have.
I think one of the things that always jumps out for me when talking to stage managers about if they want to make a shift away from theatre or make a shift within theatre, they have all these tangible skills but find it quite hard to identify what those ones are in another context.
From my experience since then, and now I have worked not as a stage manager for longer than I did work as a stage manager, I think there's sort of 2 main things. One is the incredible ability to make things happen on time with attention to detail, okay? Because I have found, moving into the world that I am now, that actually being able to stick to deadlines and complete work and persuade people to work with you, they're all skills that I developed as a stage manager, but they're incredibly useful, and actually they're quite rare. There's an awful lot of people who don't have those. Now, there's something negative about that skill set, which is that stage managers are incredibly good at attention to detail. And I have found in the past that some of them are not good about getting their head out of that detail and looking at the bigger picture. So that might determine to some extent where it is that you want to go work-wise, okay? So if you want to move into some sort of administrative job that requires that, I mean, I'm just saying as an example, membership administration, then if you're that kind of stage manager who's very much on the doing, the micromanaging, the attention to detail, then that's great. But to my mind, stage managers also have another skill set, or it might be a different kind of stage manager, which is that they are good at taking responsibility and therefore can make great leaders. Their communication skills and the fact that, if you think about it as a company stage manager on a production, you take a vision and you make it happen. You don't just buy a prop that looks right. You are going to make sure that that prop can be used by an actor, fits into the vision of the designer, is appropriate for the director, and has the effect on the audience. So that's a holistic picture. So if you're that kind of person, and Antonia will confirm that I am that kind of person, rather than am I going to find that right prop? Antonia always was much better at doing that. So then it's probably a different kind of role that you want to aim for. I think stage managers make fantastic leaders because you need very good communication skills, and that is essential for a stage manager. You need to talk to so many different people as a stage manager and persuade them all to buy into one thing and make it happen by 7:30 on Friday the 3rd of March or whatever it is. And that is the same as managing a company. It's the same as managing a staff team. So that's what you're trying to do. But it's a style of leadership that you have as a stage manager, which is inclusive. I would say it's the modern style of leadership, the style of leadership that goes, I'm the boss of this company and I'm the dictator and I'll say what goes, is going out the window. There is a lot more now about leadership, which is about how you listen to the staff, the stakeholders, the beneficiaries, if it's a charity or members, whatever it might be, and how you then take a vision from that and take it forward and implement it. And I think stage managers are absolutely predestined at being good at that, if they've been good stage managers, obviously. So that's why I think they would work. So communication skills, it's that being able to see that vision, and it's taking people with you. Stage managers, do you know what I mean? You can't make a company work at their best unless they buy into it. Not just you're going on stage, mate. You have to persuade them that this is the best thing they always wanted to do, right? Even if they were just having a tantrum. Another thing that's good about stage managers is that they are able to take responsibility. You've probably all been in that situation. There's a crisis, or the buck stops with you. Now, there are, again, the types of stage managers who don't like taking responsibility, and that's fine. They will stay, as working as a more junior person in a team. And like I say, they will be looking to transfer their skills to maybe a slightly different job. But the company stage manager on tour, I don't know about you, but I will not forget that matinee in Taunton when I was about 24. One of my actors developed an allergy in Act 1. Literally, he blew up in front of my eyes like Elephant Man. I'm 24. I am very far removed from anybody who runs the company to tell me what to do, right? And if I cancel that show, they're going to have to pay loads of money back to the audience, So actually, I'm glad to say that in the interval, that actor was dragged to the local GP surgery. He was given an antihistamine, and he went on for Act 2. I'm just saying, you need to not crumple in such a situation. And, you will have found out as a stage manager, if you are that kind of stage manager that doesn't panic in a crisis. Because if you've worked for a few years, you will inevitably have come across some sort of live theatre panic. And there are literally people who can't cope with them. And I'm like, you're not really a stage manager.
I just had a flashback to a situation where I was doing the last week of a 6-month tour, and we were at the Sits in Glasgow, and we had a bank holiday on the Monday, and the lead actor decided to go for a walk around Loch Lomond. The next day he was in hospital with septicemia. And I had it was that sort of place where I knew it had to be solved. I was far removed from everyone. What do I do? And I dealt with it. I was thinking about a time. I was on a coach actually on the M4, and the driver had started to nod off. Okay. I was coming back from a get out in London. Anyway, the woman in front of me stood up and started to shout, "Don't panic, I'm trained in crisis management." And I was like, that's the worst thing you can say. At which point the whole 52-seater coach started to panic. So that was a massive lesson for me as a take home in how not to respond in those situations and how would a stage manager respond. And I love that idea of that empathetic leader, that we take the team with you, and it's that collaborative way of working as opposed to the dictatorship and you'll do it my way.
Can we unpick the persuasion thing a bit more? Because I think that is one of the most underrated skills. You know, my father, he could persuade an elephant to buy a mouse as a pet, but I can persuade a director that, you know, this prop that we found is the perfect prop for their show because of this reason. And maybe the character, maybe their grandfather was a general in the army. I can tell the tale that will persuade the director to do something. And like you say about the actors going on, you know, I did a show last year where we played for quite a long time and, you know, we get to near the end and some of my cast were like, do we have to go on today, Antonia? And I was like, yes, we do. And why do we need to do that? But I think the ability to be able to persuade people to do things, I think sometimes people think that sounds a bit like, you know, like you're doing something fake if you're persuading somebody to do something.
Let's not call it persuading. Let's call it, you know, getting people to buy into the vision. Because that's what I'm doing, okay? So you might have a really boring job in my company, right? You've got to do the office management or you've got to do, you know what I mean, data entry, whatever. But what I need to provide for everybody and for that person as well is to see how their work contributes to the valuable outcome that we're producing as a company. So I need to be always very clear. What is the vision? Who are we benefiting? What is the great thing that we're doing? So in my case, at the moment, you know, we are supporting our members and we're supporting leisure time music, and how even, you know, the data entry or keeping the storeroom tidy contributes to that ultimately. So it's not so much persuading as making sure that everybody understands how they're contributing. And that's kind of very similar to theatre because, you know, you do get, disgruntled people backstage or wherever, and they kind of go, oh, well, it doesn't matter if I don't do X, Y, and Z. But actually, every bit matters. And we know that in theatre. And you know, I'm sure you've been to see shows where I go, oh my God, they must have a great company manager, because that's what the show exudes on stage. You know, it is that much better because everybody's bought into that and everybody's a happy company. So I think, yeah, that's what I would say is get everybody to be clear about the vision and how they contribute to that.
And once the director has left, that is your job. Your job is to carry on that vision of the director and that kind of the detail, the attention to detail that means that you are delivering the same show with the same values and the same experience day in, day out.
There's something else that I'd like to mention, which is really very, very topical for right now, which is planning and crisis management. Okay. So, I mean, as stage managers, you already have plan A to Z. And actually, that is very, very relevant to running an organization. Because, you know, you do need to do that. I mean, you know, you do a risk assessment for your organization in the same way that you do for putting a show on stage. You know, it's just that my risk assessment will have different things in it. You know, it will have, you know, membership not renewing. But you still have to do that and you still have to plan for eventualities. You know, we have a disaster recovery plan, for instance. And then if a crisis strikes, like coronavirus, not to panic. What has been great here, I mean, I'm not taking the entire credit because Ben, who works with me, is absolutely, he is an honorary stage manager, I'd just like to say. You know, within 2 weeks, we had everybody running perfectly happily, working from home. And we were basically, you know, very clear about what we were doing for members for the rest of the year in this situation, and nobody panicked. So that's the thing, is not to panic and to kind of go, okay, the situation's changed, but that's not a problem. We'll get on with it, you know. And that is surely where stage managers will shine.
Definitely. I think that's one of the great strengths of stage managers for me, is that pragmatic approach, isn't it? And certainly, and I'm sure we've all had moments during this pandemic where maybe it gets a bit overwhelming and you start to think about the bigger global picture and what that means. But certainly when you look at how we respond to that, what can't I change? I can't change the fact that there is a pandemic. I can't change the law. I have to live within whatever those guidelines and laws are. But what can I do within that? And if you know what those parameters are, then you've got a much more realistic, calm approach to what you're going to do, really, isn't it? Do you know, one of the things you mentioned, Barbara, that was really interesting, because it's probably really glaring and obvious as a transferable skill. But I was like, oh yeah, we do, don't we? It's the fact that we work to and hit deadlines. Because we have that deadline looming over us constantly. We're not in a job where that deadline shifts or moves. That first show, that 7 p.m, that curtain up will always be there. And that's one of the things I stress to students. But the fact that we always hit that deadline. So I think that's a great asset for stage managers to think about.
And my other favourite stage management skill, which stage managers are always really rubbish at recognising, is what is technically referred to as conflict resolution.
Yeah, definitely, and the problem solving as well, right? You're forever as a stage manager faced with, the director coming in at 9 o'clock on a Monday and going, oh, by the way, I've decided to drop 3 actors from the flies into a burning pit, or something, and you go, sure. How do you find solutions? So one of the things that you do as a stage manager, isn't it, because you're a jack of all trades and master of none, is you go and ask someone else, right? Now that is actually the leadership skill, okay? So if I have something that I want to address, I don't just sit in my office and try and find a solution and then find that everybody else hates it. No, I go to Ben or to whoever is appropriate and go, we've got to find a solution for this. What should we do? And you use other people as sounding boards or expertise or whatever. This is not a failing of yours if you don't know everything. There's too much to be known in the world, but therefore the skill is in finding out what is worth knowing about a topic and then taking that away and actioning it in the way that is useful.
We see some people see that as a weakness, don't they? And you're just a bit like, why is it a weakness to go and seek expert advice or opinion? Because like you say, the skill is then to sift through that.
That's one of my propping pieces of advice to students, is that out there, whatever you are looking for, there is always an expert who will love it and will talk about it and will tell you everything you need to know about it. I've got a question for you and I want you to answer it honestly, okay? Have you ever thought about not working in stage management and considered it seriously? And I'm not talking about when you're in a really awful show and going, oh, I want to go and do something else. Have you ever thought, oh, it's time for me to move?
Well, I guess I did. I suppose I did do that, didn't I? Because I went into education.
Oh, but it's still kind of stage management.
Things have changed a lot in the last 10 years in terms of having children and working in the theatre. But the honest answer is, a lot of the time, you still have to work in an evening. And if you've got small children, then that means you're not there for bedtime and bath time. And we might all say, my children would tell you I was never there, but they're not very polite about me and my parenting skills. But working in college did allow me to do partly that and also work in stage management. But no, absolutely not. I did a podcast. I was interviewed by somebody in America the other week, and she said to me, have you ever thought about doing anything else for a living? And I was like, no. And actually, that's the reason why I wanted to come back into practice, because I spent a lot of time in education and I love teaching. But because my kids are grown up, I was like, I can go back into practice now, because I felt like I wanted to go. And I wanted to go and almost do it again and do it better. Because I had a very fast trajectory. I was Barbara's ASM, then I went to be a DSM. Then before I blinked, I was in a stage manager role, and I was a terrible CSM when I was 23, because I was 23. And I would say to any stage manager, don't rush through those job roles. It's so tempting when somebody's offering you a higher grade position with more money attached to it. But actually, in order to be a CSM, I do believe you do need a bit more of kind of life about you in that sense.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because my favourite job actually was DSM in opera, because, you know, I have quite a big sort of classical music background personally, and, you know, I love opera. All good musicals, but let's not go there. So I was resisting moving on from that job, but I did eventually, and actually I really enjoyed being a CSM. So maybe you might tempt me back to be the DSM on an opera, but otherwise you won't tempt me back. Like I say, I was looking at moving on to kind of do more of the scene setting that stage managers work in, even before I had children. But yet at the time, children were also something, you know, I was like touring most of the time before then. You know, you definitely can't do that. And my husband was also freelance. So, you know, that was bad enough as it was, trying to juggle that. So there was a motivation to move on within theatre. You know, I would have thought that maybe I'd become administrator of a touring company or a general manager of a venue or something like that. That's probably what I was aiming for. And we know that in UK theatre, in the organisation, you know, probably half of the people who are members there used to be stage managers. I mean, let's face it, you know. So that is really good, because if you do know the theatre from the bottom up, so to speak, you know, how to make that show happen in the evening, you are going to be a good leader, you know, when you get to being a general manager. I think that, or a producer, that is going to be really good. You're not going to expect the wrong things from the people that you're managing and producing. Then when I had children, I mean, Antonia, you're right, that really at the time, it was not compatible working in theatre as a stage manager. It would have been as an administrator, you know what I mean? That's different. And having children. And I'm sure that is a reason for moving on. I don't think it's a reason that can necessarily be addressed within theatre. And I just say this because I feel that being a parent is underrated as a job. You know, what could be more responsible than being responsible for the next generation? You have to learn about so many things. It's interesting, you know, and actually, you know, I had the time, like I say, to take it seriously with my first child. I guess I had the stage manager approach to children, you know. So my friends and I joke that we were very stage managery about bedtime, you know, stand by bedtime go, you know, was absolutely, you know.
That sounds like my house. And I feel like that could be a #1 bestseller, How to Stage Manage Your Child. It's waiting to be written.
When I meet producers now, I think, see, I wish I'd known more about that, because that actually would have encompassed some of my practical side, but also a more creative role. Because, of course, I totally buy to the mantra that stage managers are equally as creative. We're just creative in different ways. So it's nice to see now that there's more profile for producers, and actually I know a few younger stage managers who have moved into producing.
I agree that there's still a lack of knowledge about what jobs within theatre you can move on to, and I just like to mention some famous producers who were stage managers: Cameron McIntosh, Sonia Friedman, and Judith Kramer. Okay, they were all stage managers, and look how it's helped them get to where they are, because they deliver on time, they deliver on budget, you know, and they work in a way, you know, when I've ever come across them, that is very stage managery, you know, collaborative.
Taking it back a step, and correct me if I'm wrong, and we've talked about family life being maybe one of those reasons. I could probably name all of the stage managers who retire as a stage manager in my network of friends and colleagues. Why do you think there's such a and there is a high number for stage managers leaving the profession. Like, I think we're talking about it quite comfortably, that we'll go and be a producer, or we'll go and be a general manager, or we'll look for another industry. We've talked about family, but do you think there are other reasons why we...
Well, I'll tell you why people want to move on, and that is what is wrong with the theatre industry, is it does not pay you a living. It does not give you a life-work balance. It does not give you professional development opportunities. It does not give you a career structure. And so that is the main problem why people move. So that is the main thing. And I think that is what this crisis has pointed up, is that people have worked for too little money and has said yes to conditions all the time that they should not have agreed to, because they are not a proper living. And I'm afraid the situation is only going to improve when people say, no, I charge twice as much as that.
I completely echo that. And I do hope, coming out of this crisis, in whatever state the theatre industry is left in, is that we use it as an opportunity to address those major issues and we make it for change. I'm concerned that we won't, and it won't be addressed. But I think that's a major factor, that there is no, because it's reliant on self-employed, there is no structure in there for people to have that trajectory that they would get everywhere else.
And then we wonder why the news says currently, theatre's elitist. And you're like...
20 years ago, I tried to persuade West End producers to have job shares for stage management.
Yeah.
I mean, they still haven't done it. Let's be realistic. If all stage managers stopped working, you cannot put a show on without some sort of stage manager.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand By Please. Until next time, Jacqui and Antonia, off cans.